Half a day students, I am Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. You all have been through a year of big changes. We've had to adapt and make big changes to keep our families and our island safe. But with change comes opportunity and a chance to try new things like PBS University. While Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio and I will continue to do our part to keep our island safe, you students have a part to play as well. Your part is to keep learning and to keep up with your lessons. That's why I am happy to see you here ready to learn with PBS University. PBS University is a way to bring a continuous educational curriculum to you while you stay safe at home during this time. To help you keep up with your studies, we asked our friends at PBS Guam and the Guam Department of Education to put together this episode. Thank you for doing your part and have a great lesson.
Half a day. Welcome to the Guam Department of Agriculture. My name is John C. Borja. I'm the Agriculture Development Services Division Chief. And today we're going to talk a little bit about seed to harvest. My experience back then is that I'm an avid farmer. I've grown vegetables since I was at the age of 11. I grew up in a farming community and I'm able to understand how to raise vegetables. More importantly, how to care for the land and whatever environmental conservative practices that I can account for. But through the years, I developed that skills and expertise by going and getting my master's degree and my degree at the Department of Agriculture as well as at the University of Guam. So in light of that, you may call me an expert, but I'm still learning as I grow things. We are going to talk a little bit about seed to harvest. And that kind of subject matter is very important if you want to start your own garden, if you want to grow something for the market, or if you want to just grow something for all of the experience of growing something. So if you're looking at harvesting something from a vegetable or from a fruit tree, you need to understand one very important concept. When do you want the harvest to happen? So if you're looking at harvesting eggplant, for example, it takes at least 75 days from a transplanted eggplant seedling to produce an eggplant. And even on the first harvest, you may only get a few eggplants rather than an abundance of eggplant. So you gotta be considering about how many eggplant plants you need to have to fulfill your quota, to fulfill your needs. So when you plant an eggplant seed, for example, it may take up to 7 days to grow, germinate, and will take at least 14 days to be ready for planting in the ground. And when you do that, you need to prepare your ground as well as your needs for the plants to be maintained in regards to the nutrients needs, the pest management needs, and also we're going to be talking a little bit about the post-harvest in the next episode. So what it is that is very important and vital that you back schedule or back date from the time you want your harvest to happen to the number of days back to the start of the planting of the seed or the plant itself. In regards to that, you may have to also refer to some literature. You may look up at your seed catalog. We'll have a lot of informational stuff on types of vegetable plants and when they are be harvestable and when they are able to germinate the seeds. You can also go online, and if you go online, you'll be able to get more information as well as finding out from A to Z what it takes to make a plant produce for your needs. Now, the other part of growing plants is some gardeners will grow plants to make seeds. So in that case, you're going to have to let the seeds go to maturity or the fruits go to maturity so they can be able to produce the seeds. And only then you will know and understand the value of saving your own seeds because of the cost of buying seeds and having the availability of seeds at the stores or ordering it online. So a lot of this is basically your knowledge and be able to understand what is being presented to you online, or if you have a book, like what I usually refer to as the gardening book or how to grow your vegetables and fruit trees. So this book itself, I've had this for ages. This is my inspirational book. So if I need to refer to something, I can always open it up and look at a certain crop. And it'll tell me about which plant, how to grow it, and how to do all the necessary stuff for post-harvest needs. If you are very comfortable in the garden, you also enjoy the luxury of having a few time out in the open air, nature, and be able to do exercise by farming and gardening. This is going to be a harvest period, your reap of your hard labor. So a lot of this stuff will start from seed, obviously, and it will end up as to be a harvestable plant or something that you can plant in the field for a harvest for your own needs. So it's very important about seeds. To have a viable seeds, you must be able to store the seeds in a place that is safe from temperature changes and from like, for example, rodents. Rodents, rats love to eat seeds or other insects. So be able to preserve it so they have a longevity of the seeds for your use. Some practices are made to have the seeds last longer is to put it in a sealed container in your refrigerator at a cool temperature, because the temperature there is a constant so that it doesn't change or drop. But be mindful that if there's no power, you may have temperature change. So just do not take it out, do not open the container, and do not be able to compromise the seed, because once you open the container, it would make the seeds become not viable, not worth planting. Some seeds will take up to 15 years, still good, still viable. One method traditionally is to grow the seeds to see whether it's good or not, is to drop it in a bowl of water before planting it. If the seeds sink, the seeds are very viable. There's an embryo, there's a germplasm in there that's saying that it's fully intact. If it floats, then it's no good. It's basically nothing in there, just air. So that's one way of knowing whether your seeds are good. So enjoy your farming, your gardening, and be able to produce the love of whatever you want to grow for the benefits of your health and for your needs. Next topic we're going to talk about is post-harvest. Post-harvest is very important. All the efforts that you had done prior from seed to harvest is just as important, but post-harvest is much, much more important, because that's the end result of your growing of the plants. Now, if you want to ask yourself, why is it so important? Because that's when the fruit of your labor has to be as well protected as when you were growing the plants. So one of the things that people have a tendency of doing is that when they harvest things, the first question they ask is, when do I harvest? Is the fruit mature enough to harvest? So if the fruits are not ready for harvesting, then it might not have the desired qualities that you want. So now it goes to waste. It's immature. But if you understand the process of how the fruits mature and when to pick it, you can have a full benefit as to the wholesomeness of the vegetable or fruit. One of the things I want to show you is tomatoes. Tomatoes are a very good vegetable to show people what we're talking about with post-harvest. When you want to harvest something, normally for yourself, you may probably want to harvest your tomatoes when they're ripe or fully ripe. But for the market or for long shelf life, you don't want to harvest it when they're already ripe, because it shortens their shelf life. The shelf life meaning when you put it in your cardboard or into your refrigerator. What you want to do is harvest your tomatoes when you see a little color break, a little tinge of color, yellowish, so that the tomato itself is firm and it has a longer shelf life. Plus, when you take it off the vine or off the plant, it's not damaged further by an insect or whatnot ripening. Because as the plant matures and the fruit ripens, you also have a lot of issues with the overwatering or too little water, or insects that may be able to destroy your crops or your fruits. Then you will not have a fruit. So the best time to harvest, for example, your fruits are normally tomatoes, is when there's a color break. Unless you want to get it ready for your dish, you may want to harvest it when it's really fully ripe. The other thing is eggplant. A lot of people think that an eggplant is very delicious and ready for harvesting when they're starting to turn yellow. This is a green eggplant. Normally, when it starts to turn yellow, a change of color from greenish to yellow is showing you that it's going to maturity. So when it goes to maturity, it's not desired for eating. It's too tough. Plus, it's only going to be used for seeds. So you can save this for seed production, but not for your edibles. Some people may want to harvest peppers. So a lot of this is knowing what type of pepper, what your needs are, and whether or not the color is of importance for presentation or for the qualities you want to showcase. What else can happen to your post-harvest or your fruits and vegetables? The biggest danger to fruits and vegetables that you're harvesting for yourself or for the market is heat. The sun, radiant heat. If you put this in the car and the windows are roll up and there's no circulation of air and it's a very hot day, heat would destroy your vegetables that you're saving for yourself or for the market. What heat does is that it breaks down the tissue of the vegetable or fruit and it starts to decay and wilt. A lot of times people also have a tendency of putting things in the bag. When you put something in the bag, like your peppers, your tomatoes and you seal your bag in an inappropriate way, like this, and tie down, you're actually trapping air inside but not letting it exchange. So what's happening is that ripening fruit are letting out a gas called ethylene gas. It's going to perspire inside the bag, and then it'll be slowly, gradually degrading your vegetables or fruits in your bag. Heat. So oftentimes when we go shopping for vegetables, we put this in the car and we go do something else. You leave in the car, it's basically going to waste. So first of all, before you leave your car and you bag your vegetables, I always say tie up, not down. So when you tie up, it's basically the reverse of going down. Instead of going down, you go up. Okay, so you pull up the ears and tie up. So what this allows to happen is that you have a vent. If you look at this, the bag, you can see that there's a vent. So air escapes. So now the heat and the gas doesn't get to be trapped in here. Now you don't have spoilage. So any kind of vegetables, there's a degree of it being spoiled because of the heat. So again, heat is the number one cause. And if you're going to sell to the market, presentation is very important. Ensure that your vegetables are clean. They are basically washed, free of pesticides. If you know your pesticide use is going to take 3 days before harvest, do not spray after the 3 days or before the 3 days of harvest. Let it sit for at least a couple days prior so that the residue is not on the fruits or vegetables. So keep that in mind. So whenever you try to grow something and you want to get the benefit of your harvest, it's going to go to waste if you don't protect and conserve what you have harvested. So thank you again for having to understand seed to harvest and post-harvest production. Day, welcome back. We're going to talk a little bit about lunar farming. Lunar farming, if you wonder what lunar means, that means basically using the moon and the cycles of the moon to be able to grow and produce the produce or the vegetables that you want for your home garden, for your specialty needs and whatnot. Traditionally, farmers were dependent upon the moon phases, just the same as the fishermen. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what does the lunar effect have on plants when you plant the plants to the point when you harvest it. Lunar is termed in the U.S. as part of the lunar ecosystem farming. Here in Guam, we traditionally call it the Chamorro method of farming without having to use any other written guides, but because it is a traditional thing, it is inherited from the children, from their dads or the parents who are farming. The one biggest thing is that you have to know what type of plants you're going to plant in regards to the lunar schedule. If you were to plant any vegetables above ground, you need to remember they do well when it's the new moon phase to the full moon phase. If you're going to plant anything underground, like root crops, like tapioca, sweet potato, taro, the phase that is most important to plant them in regards to lunar is from the full moon to first new moon. Anything underground. Everything above ground is from the new moon to the full moon. With one exception, everything seems to go slower from the last phase of the moon to the full moon phase. So there's 4 quarters, 4 times a year you may plant something different, and there's 4 phases, which actually every 4 quarters you're going to have a full moon. Okay, so keep that in mind. And something else is more important. When you harvest other stuff for the use at the farm, like your stakes, your tongan wood, your stakes for the trellis, it's best to pick it on a new moon, because the difference in that, if you were to try yourself, is that if you were planting something and used the trellis and picked it and harvested the wood material, the tongan, and you got it on a new moon, try also getting it on a full moon and see the difference. The difference I can tell you now is that if you harvest it and use it during the new moon period, you can use it for 3 more planting cycles. It would not deteriorate as fast as if it were to be planted or harvested on the moon phase, the full moon phase. So knowing that, when to plant, how much to plant, it's all dependent on the moon. Because back then, traditionally, we don't have any guidance, we don't have online, surfing on online to get the information, and we pretty much literally depend on the moon cycles. Just the same as animals, it's inclusive of that too. When you raise farm animals, you know the nature of the animal. And in Guam, we have unregulated, uncontrolled ungulate problem. So if you grow your plants, most of the time this ungulate, the wild pigs, come out when the moon is a little bit brighter, because it gives them a sense of security, that they can see broader areas to know that danger is there. So keep in mind, when you plant things in full moon, you're planting things that are going to be underground. And usually those plants that are root crops will take anywhere from 4 to 6 months to a year, depending on what it is. So one important thing also is that when you're doing your root crops, you got to cure your planting materials. So for example, this is tapioca. Tapioca you can grow from cuttings or slips, but it requires for you to grow it when there's full moon period. So what it is that the rhizome, the roots, the rhizome roots will come out from the stalks, and this is what's going to produce the roots that you're going to harvest. So this will be your root crop. Tapioca is one of them, sweet potato and taro. The other thing is that tapioca will take at least 4 months to have a good harvest, depending again on what size of the tuber you want. The other plant that you can also plant is ikamas, or the uca plant, or the, what should we call it, the Mexican bean. That one there is a vine. However, that is a root crop, but be careful of that because that's an invasive type of plant. So when you want to plant something again, work your schedule to get the best of your planting by knowing and understanding your lunar. Insects, when you're farming with lunar, you have to understand when the insects are more prevalent. They're more likely to be there to destroy crops. A lot of the insects come out at night. It's not only daytime. So you got to understand, when you want to find a problem to your insect problem, check your plants at night. I'm telling you now that some insects come out at night when you're asleep, and they will eat your plants. So understanding that also, their life cycles revolve around a lunar cycle also. So do your root crops from the period of full moon to new moon, and you're above ground like your eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, beans during the time of new moon to full moon. And remember that period of slow process or slow growth is the last phase of the moon, from the new moon to the full moon, or the third quarter to the last quarter. So knowing that, you can have a more prolific production in your farm, plus in a timely manner when to harvest and when it's available for your use. So if you have any questions in regards to that, you can look it up again online, and you can also come to us for assistance to understand that. But basically, just like fishermen, just like the farmers, traditional farming practices is to understand your lunar phases. So what are the best plants to grow above ground? We're talking about eggplants, tomatoes, beans, cucumbers, bitter melon, anything that you're going to grow from seed that is going to grow up and you're going to support it, or is going to be nurtured above grounds. Those are above ground plants. Those plants are good to be grown, planted in the ground from the first moon phase to the first full moon phase, or prior to the full moon phase. There's a period called no production or slow production, and that phase is from the last quarter to the full moon. That period is a slow phase. Now anything that's a root crop, now root crop, you must understand, is that when you plant the plants, it may be above ground, but the roots, the rhizomes, will go into the ground and produce your tuber, your roots. Examples of below ground are basically like tapioca, sweet potato, taro, potatoes if you want to try that, okay? And because there's another plant that is actually invasive, is the jicamas, or they call it the Mexican potato. That's a root also, but that is very limiting because it only has one tuber per vine. Okay, so understanding that, you'll be able to get the worth and benefit of having to grow things above ground during the phase of the first moon through the last phase of the fourth quarter and into the full moon. Okay, so understanding that, we can go now forward as to what's best to do in those periods. If you were to be growing things above ground like beans, and you want to get trellises like tongan, they are naturally grown. Tongan can be used for your cooking and also for your farming. You want to pick it during the phase of the new moon so that you can use that wood, those trellises, to prolong your growing cycle, or to use it 3 more times, growing 3 more growing cycles so that you don't need to get new ones. If you were to get it during the full moon phase, the life of the trellis, the lumber, the timber, the tongan will be less. You will only use it 1 cycle or 2 at the most. They will deteriorate because it wasn't picked in the right moon phase. A lot of people think that because you have a brighter moon, everything can grow better. But because one main character of the moon is gravity. When you talk about fishing, we talk about the tides. When the moon is seen at the horizon, it is pretty much understood it's high tide. When the moon is overhead at 12, it's understood that it's getting to be either low tide or low tide going to high tide. So if you understand that, there's a pull on gravity. So it does act also on plants when you farm. And the moon lunar acts also well with livestock or with feral pigs. You'll see more activity with feral pigs when the moon's brighter because they need more light to be able to be aware of their situation where they're at in terms of having to know the surroundings and danger. So not necessarily that they're able to see the vegetable or the root crops. Their snout is very, very sensitive. They can find it even without the moon. But to understand that. Okay, another thing that you have to understand, when you're planting root crops during the full moon, you got to also prep the plant material. And with that plant material, when you get your cuttings, you got to make sure that the cuttings are mature enough for planting. But you just don't plant it right away. You got to plant it where you cure the cutting part, the part where it's cut off. You got to cure it, either put it in the ash and then let it sit until the new growth happens. When the new growth happens on the stem, you can plant it in the ground. Another thing about moon phases and also day and night differences is that when you're harvesting your banana or when you have your banana blossom, you got to make sure that the blossom itself is taken off the tree or off the fruit. So when I'm talking about the blossom, we're looking at the banana heart. If you take this off during the early morning, it's good. So the sap doesn't get dripping off the plant, off the fruit, and becomes less or smaller. But if you were to take this in the evening off the plant, off the fruit, it will keep dripping more sap and the plant material will be drained. You're going to have less full bananas and it's not going to be as big as they should be. So this is what you have to understand. Lunar is important. What you do during the lunar time is good. And another aspect about lunar is that when you harvest root crops and it's a dry night, you can air dry your harvest on the ground and basically wash it later or not wash it at all, because once you start washing root crops, it will start to grow and stimulate the roots to grow again on the tuber. So you don't want that to happen, because you want to safeguard that for the quality to be used for the market or for your home consumption. So once you start having roots grow on your root crops, that means it's going to decay or maturity. So if you have any questions, or if you need to know a little bit more about lunar planting, traditional methods, in other words, in general, you may contact my office at the Department of Agriculture at 300-7974 or 7973. We hope to hear from you, because this is a very interesting organic practices and traditional practices that we want to share with you. Thank you for your time.
Hafa students, I'm Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. For more than a year now, you all have continued to wash your hands and watch your distance from others, and you've done a really great job wearing your masks. We know your parents and guardians have helped you to make these changes to keep yourself and your community safe. As Governor Leon Guerrero said, we are happy you are here. We want you to continue to learn and sharpen your skills with the help of PBS University. This program is the result of a collaborative effort. We couldn't do it alone. I'd like to thank the teachers and support staff of the Guam Department of Education and PBS Guam for their work and their commitment to our students. I'd also like to thank you students for participating at home. To your parents, I'd like to thank you for taking an active role in your child's education. We are all eager to return to a time when all of us can share and study together in person. Until then, we hope you learned something new from this PBS University instruction.